Vince McMahon is the man responsible for making wrestling famous, but he is also responsible for destroying it. Don't get me wrong, I really believe if it weren't for Vince making wrestling what it is, we wouldn't have gotten legendary stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Hulk Hogan, Roman Reigns, and even Cody Rhodes. But the fact that Vince McMahon has hindered the business for many years cannot be overlooked. From not pushing younger talent with potential and just shoving old part-timers down our throats, to having storylines that just didn't make sense and were inconsistent, Vince McMahon had truly destroyed the WWE he once created. But then,
WWE founder Vince McMahon has stepped away from wrestling as the board of the company investigates a $3 million payment made to a former employee with whom he allegedly had an affair.
That's right, in 2022, Paul Levesque, aka Triple H, stepped up to be the creative head and Papa H saved this company. But how did Triple H save the company from the awful state that Vince left it in?
WWE wasn't always as terrible as the state Vince left it in. In fact, some would argue that the company was even better than today in the past. But before we talk about that, we need to give Vince his flowers. This man was crazy enough to gamble everything he had. The wrestling business in the early 1980s wasn't that crazy, with just some various promotions operating independently across the US. Nothing too grand like football or boxing. Vince McMahon at that time had the craziest vision at the time. He wanted to create a wrestling event that would be the Super Bowl equivalent of pro wrestling. Nothing like this was done at the time. Vince was putting his entire company on the line and investing everything he had to make this possible. If he failed, then he could be on the streets. He still took the risk. And
welcome everyone, the World Wrestling Federation presents WrestleMania. Santana off the ropes.
WrestleMania 1 was a huge success. The event had an attendance of 19,121 fans in Madison Square Garden, over 1 million viewers across the United States through television, and an impressive revenue of $3.8 million from closed-circuit television alone, which would be equivalent to around $8.5 million today when adjusted for inflation. Vince's gamble had paid off, and he had just created the Super Bowl of wrestling, and the success didn't stop there. Throughout the next few years, WWE continued to expand its reach globally. Vince was so dedicated to the business that he even made himself a villain on television and solidified himself as one of WWE's most hated characters. He would do this in order to gain love from the fans for characters such as Stone Cold Steve Austin. In the next few years, Vince would continue building stars like The Rock, Triple H, Undertaker, Eddie Guerrero, John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, and the list goes on and on. The roster was stacked, the stories were wild and memorable, and each year, WrestleMania became bigger, with marquee matches, elaborate sets, and memorable moments. Vince had made wrestling global. Fast forward to 2019, WWE wasn't the same as before. We no longer had household names such as The Rock and Stone Cold. Ratings were at an all-time low, and while financially WWE was doing all right, creatively the programming was bad and we as fans were suffering. I remember trying to force myself to watch an episode of Raw during that time and it was unbearable. The characters just didn't stand out. And while the fans had a few favorites, such as Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, and Dean Ambrose, now known as Jon Moxley, the wrestlers just lacked personality. If you compare the roster of any year from the PG era to the Attitude Era, or even the Ruthless Aggression Era, the PG era roster doesn't compare and looks so dull and boring. Wrestlers just didn't have any engaging characters and storylines sucked. Vince's accomplishments as a booker cannot be overlooked, but it felt like that he just couldn't understand what the fans wanted and product suffered. To put it simply, WWE sucked at the time. After Vince McMahon had to retire on July 25th, 2022 due to reasons, WWE needed someone to take charge, someone who had experience running a show and knew what it was like to be a wrestler themselves, someone who could be trusted and had good relations with the family, someone who the fans and the talent liked. If only there was someone like that. Oh wait, Triple H was handed the charge of the creative, which essentially made him the booker, and let me tell you, this was no nepotism move. Paul Levesque actually knew how to run a wrestling show, which could be seen from his time running the NXT, and during that time, he gave us countless stars, such as Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and many more. Triple H's booking was praised by the internet wrestling community frequently, and some people even went on to claim that their developmental show was better than flagship shows. This was the only proof needed to appoint Triple H as the head of creative, and we saw the Paul Levesque effect fully for the first time at SummerSlam 2022. Leading up to SummerSlam in 2022, we didn't have much high expectations of the show. The booking of SummerSlam 2022 was written and approved by Vince McMahon before he stepped down. The only matches I personally cared about at that time were the attraction matches, Logan Paul versus The Miz, and Pat McAfee versus bum-ass Corbin. Hell, most of the people didn't even care about the main event. I mean, why would they? We were getting Lesnar versus Reigns for the millionth time, and people were just not invested in it. Triple H may be a great booker, but he can't possibly save this garbage of a match. Or can he?
Lesnar's lifted up the ring with Roman Reigns in it, with a damn trapped her. Reigns falls out of the entire ring. This is one of the damnedest things I've ever seen in my life.
Papa H proved that his era was going to be special. This match went from being one of the least interesting things that year to one of the all-time great matches ever. We had surprise returns of Bayley, Dakota Kai, and Io Sky as a new faction. All the matches felt like they delivered, except a few. Nonetheless, the show was well received by critics and fans alike, and a change was seen in future shows. The most notable change was the talent morale. All the wrestlers seemed much more excited and passionate. Wrestling on each show was significantly better. We were getting pay-per-view worthy matches on Raw and SmackDown. I personally started to feel the change during that Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens promo, where Drew said, "We are wrestlers in a wrestling ring. Let's just freaking wrestle." Do y'all realize how crazy that is?
It's sports entertainment!
Vince would never have allowed anybody on their show to say the word wrestler. Well, Triple H says F that. Other than that, Papa H revived both the mid-card titles. That was seen on the Raw after SummerSlam 2022, where we had #1 contender qualifying matches for the U.S. title. A match to be in a #1 contender, the U.S. title needed that so much. It became prestigious again. The Intercontinental title became the workhorse title again with Triple H, allowing Gunther to have the reign of a lifetime. 666 days. That is the number of days Gunther was Intercontinental Champion. If Vince was booking that, then we probably would have gotten 7 to 8 different champions during that time. Everyone and their mother would have held the mid-card titles. But you know what Papa H says? F that. We give these titles their prestige and glory back. The women's wrestling is the best it's ever been. Triple H has built women talent such as Rhea Ripley, Io Sky, Liv Morgan, and many more as legit draws. Rhea Ripley's popularity is unlike anything ever seen before. The women's pay-per-view matches have been called the match of the night multiple times by the fans. Triple H has got it right with women's wrestling. One thing we often complained about during Vince's time was the storytelling. The majority of the stories felt inconsistent and lacked any depth. You know what Papa H says? F that. We have actually been getting long-term stories in the WWE during Triple H's time. The Bloodline story was already great, but Papa H made it legendary. 4 years in the making. We got stars made out of this story such as Jey Uso, Solo Sikoa, and even Cody Rhodes at the end. And it's still going. On the other side on Raw, Judgment Day's story has been really well received by the fans. A faction that actually dominated Raw. Finn Balor finally felt like he had a role again. Damian Priest became Mr. Money in the Bank. Dominic became the most hated man in that company. And Rhea Ripley, oh god, Rhea Bloody Ripley, felt like one of the faces of the company. Their booking has been consistent with a breakup being teased numerous times, but they are still going strong. WWE hasn't been this popular since I can't even remember how long ago. Many people have returned to watch the product again, and after WrestleMania 40, we no longer have to suffer the segments like suffering Succotash and Bobby's sister. We are finally in the Triple H era.